how do we organize projects and communities for the changes that are coming? We live at an incredible period in the history of the world, and it's a period that is changing incredibly fast, both for the better and for the worse. And how do we prepare communities and individuals to be resilient and creative, to build the world that works for everybody?
What's wrong with this current monetary system?
The monetary system that we have at the moment is based on a game. And the game is that that there are winners and there are losers. That there are some people who are going to thrive and benefit and grow, and there are other people who will not be able to make it. It's a win-lose game. In fact, money is probably the biggest win-lose game in the world. You know, tonight on the planet, 1 in 5 people is going to bed hungry. 1 in 9 is seriously malnourished. There are 2 billion people on this planet, which is more people than existed in the world in 1900. 2 billion people trying to live on less than $2 a day. And that's the way the world is. At the same time as that, this is a world of 1,200 billionaires. And these billionaires together have a wealth equal to 50% of the world's population. That's the ultimate win-lose game. And rather than seeing justice and fairness and equality spread, at the moment we're seeing the opposite happen. And it's considered business as usual. It's considered this is perfectly okay. And that's the ultimate tragedy. We cannot keep going like that and remain human beings. The levels of inequality that exist now, given the appearance of new technologies like genetic engineering, are making possible forever a permanent separation between 2 different species of humans. And we can't allow that to happen. So, this is the danger that we have with the current money system. We have a money system that is not based on savings. It's not based on saving environments. It's not based on saving communities. It's not based on saving life for future generations. It's not based on saving individuals. It's based on debt. And an economy that's based on debt will only increase the gap between rich and poor. So we need to reconfigure the rules of the game. Unfortunately, all around the world, there are tens of thousands of people who are working to reconfigure the rules of the game. It's happening. The question is, will it happen fast enough? And that I don't know. I don't know.
What can we do?
What can we do? First of all, is that we need to be able to deal with the emotion that comes up when we see the reality of what's happening in the world. Part of the problem we have at the moment is that we don't lack the information. The information is there. The problem is that people don't know how to deal with the emotions that come up when they're exposed to that information. And because they don't like the emotions that come up when they're confronted with the suffering of this planet, what they try and do is to shut down emotionally. We're joined by the frog that's sitting in the garden there. One of the things that's happening worldwide, just to give you an idea, is that frogs all around the world are disappearing. They're what they call a keystone species that holds the ecosystem together. But lots of people know this. And there's television programs about these things all the time. But what happens is, because we don't want to face up to the emotions that these things give us, we distract ourselves. And the weapons of mass distraction are huge. So the first thing is we need to wake up. We really need to wake up to what's happening. But rather than using the wake up as a way of disempowering ourselves, to realize that, hey folks, this is the biggest game in town. And this big game that we can play is the game that gives meaning, it's a game that gives joy, it's the game that gives connection, it's the game that gives enthusiasm. It's the most important game that is there for the human species at the moment. And it's going to be fun. It has to be fun. And it can be. And so that's the way to do it. Out of this, the liberation of that spirit, and the liberation of the creativity that comes once we move through the emotions and out the other side, out of this comes such a bursting creativity. A creativity that's stunning in its power, a creativity that is healing in the way in which it touches lives. And what we need to do is to connect with those sources of creativity. And out of that, the liberation of that creativity will come the answers. What they are, if the exact answers are, I don't know. There's a lot of little hints and clues around the place. Putting it all together is a big work for a lot of people. But that creativity is there. And that's the hope.
There's a saying that in nature there cannot be an empty space, so if you take something out, you gotta replace it with something.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to replace the current monetary system with more equal, more fair systems of...
Yeah, and that's happening. One of them, which I can show you, is this one here. This is called a boya. It's a currency system that's at the moment spreading in a number of countries. The interesting thing about the boya is that it says here that it's an emission reduction currency. One of the things that our money systems do at the moment is that the money that we have does bad as well as doing good. 15% of the total wealth of the world at the moment is being spent on organised crime. And that's not counting the money that's spent on warfare, or the money that's spent on making a few people rich and a lot of people poor. If you add those together, it's probably the bulk of the money system. Money systems like the boya are money systems that only do good instead of doing bad. This one, for instance, every boya represents a reduction in global warming. Every time you spend a euro, you're putting more than 2.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and making the climate less stable for our children. Every time you spend a boya, you take 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. What we need to start looking at is how do we create financial systems, and non-financial systems too, that only do good. What it means is creating new rules for the way in which money gets created, the way in which money gets distributed, the way in which resources get created and distributed. And those rules aren't difficult. Those rules, you get a group of people together and they can create the rules for themselves fairly easily. The question then becomes is how many of these sorts of systems can we set up? And it's happening all around the world. I was in Brazil recently and I've just heard that the Brazilian government is setting up 300 local currency systems that operate on different rules. The joy of these things is that the value reflects the values of the people who create them. At the moment, if you look at how our money system is created, through debts and loans from banks, the values that the conventional system works on is not my values. It's the values of the people who create the money. And what we need to do is to realize that communities can take that power back. Because if they create their own money, they're creating a money that's based on their values rather than accepting the values of someone else. And that's a huge sign of hope. I don't think we're going to replace the current financial system in a hurry, but the current financial system is completely unsustainable. And at the moment there's a lot of people working to try and keep it propped up for a little bit longer. But what we see in Greece, what we see in the Mediterranean countries, what we see in the Third World, in Africa and the Middle East, these are signs of collapse. And the signs of collapse are spreading. The signs of collapse show up first in the most vulnerable, but as the most vulnerable collapse, the next least vulnerable become the next most vulnerable, and then they collapse too. And eventually what you see is that even the ones that try and hang on to business as usual the longest, they will have to make the changes as well. And we can build up the capacity to cope in this time before the collapse happens, to put in place the systems and the structures that will help minimize that for all of us.
We are living in this material reality as well, and
yep.
we need the resources.
Oh, of course.
So there are many initiatives and projects who are building the new world and for a better world and
yep.
more equal. So how do you recommend, what should we do to be more successful with coping and cooperating with the current systems, and how to fundraise successfully?
Yeah. Two things. One of the things is, within the current system, there are people who are natural allies of change. There is, within every government in the world, within every business in the world, there are people who share the same values as you or I. If we treat those as the enemy, the organizations as the enemy, what we're doing is we are weakening the position of our natural allies in those organizations and strengthening the structures that are going for business as usual. So one of the things that we need to do is to be able to discover within businesses, within banks, within corporations, within governments, people who share our values. And once we find those sorts of people, what they would love to hear is for us to be able to go to them and say, look, how can I support you in the changes that you're trying to make within the structure? Within every structure, no matter how oppressive, there is a free space. And that free space is where the contradiction that structure is working inside is most visible and highest. For example, we have systems of education now that are incapable of learning, that are producing ignorance, not producing education. Now, if we can find the place where that ignorance is highest, where that lack of learning is highest, and we can make that structural contradiction visible to the wider world, that creates a free space for innovation. And so that's one thing that we can do. The second thing is that as the ineffective structures continue to collapse, how can we smooth the collapse so it becomes least destructive as possible, so that the new structures that are being born have the time and the space and the strength to be able to carry us like the safety net that we'll need once the old structures are now no longer functioning. And that's the second part of the work. Part of that needs that we need more time. We need more time. Things are going faster and faster and faster at the moment. They're faster than our ecosystems can cope with. They're faster than our communities can cope with. And they're faster than our bodies can cope with. So what we need to do is to be able to slow down. And to be able to slow down, that means slowing down the pace of destruction. It also means slowing down inside our own lives so that we can get the qualities of what real life is about. And it also means by slowing down, we get time back again. And it's time that is the source of creativity. Because if we have no time, we're just struggling in the hamster wheel, in the rat race. Creativity is the first thing that suffers. And so it's finding ways of supporting each other. You know, what do you need for support so that you can get time back in your life to be a bit more creative? And how can I support that for you? And how can you support it for me? It's a mutual sharing that is needed like this. And that kind of mutual sharing is best done in community. If we're living in a supportive and caring community, then we'll have that simplicity, we'll have that ability to create, we'll have that space in which to make the sorts of changes we need to make.
So, can you emphasize, say, like 3 first steps you recommend people who share this, want to do, they have this will?
Okay, the first thing, and this is the most important thing, is to build community. In times like this, it's people who are living in a supportive and caring community that cope the best. Now, that does not mean leaving the cities and going and living in an eco-village. You can build community in a street with your neighbours. You can build community with friends. You can build community with the people you work with. A community is defined by the quality of communication that links people together. Communication that builds trust, communication that builds understanding, communication that builds confidence. And so the first thing we need to do is build community in wherever we are, in whichever way we can. That's the first thing. The second thing we need to do, and we're only able to do this if we're living in a supportive and caring community, is to simplify. Increased complexity at the moment is not producing an improvement in our quality of life. In fact, we've crossed a threshold where increased complexity is starting to reduce the quality of our life. Now, if that's what's happening in you, in your community, in your city, in your town, the biggest thing you can do to improve your quality of life is to simplify, to reduce the complexity. And it's the reduction of complexity that gives you time. And the third thing is you need to become more creative. You need to maximize creativity on a scale that's never before been attempted. And creativity in its essence is multidimensional. You can have artistic creativity, cultural creativity, social, political and economic creativity, technological creativity, environmental creativity, spiritual creativity. We need creativity in every sphere. And creativity in one sphere will increase creativity in other spheres. So how do we maximize creativity? I'll add a fourth one to this. And the fourth one is at times like this, people tend to react with fear and violence. And we cannot fight violence with increased violence. It's the lesson that the United States is learning to its cost in Afghanistan and Iraq. Violence only increases violence. So what we need to do is to learn how to resolve conflicts non-violently, because those conflicts are going to rise. We need to do that at a family level, at a street level, at a region and district level, at a city level, at a country level, and between countries. How do we resolve the difficulties we have in a non-violent way? And if we can do those 4 things for a start, we're halfway there. There's another 3 that we need to do. The 5th thing we need to do is to preserve knowledge, preserve wisdom. Because at times like this, knowledge and wisdom disappear and they become confused with information and data. We live in a culture that produces huge amounts of information, but not much knowledge and wisdom. We need to be able to recognize the difference and to cultivate that wisdom and that knowledge. That's the 5th one. The 6th one is what happens at times like this. You get warring fundamentalism. People who believe that they have the exclusive answer to the problems and that everyone should become like them. That just produces more violence. What we need to do is to create a spiritual understanding, essentially, that is inclusive of difference, that recognizes the mystery of life rather than that it is based on a dogma that you try and force other people to adhere to. And if we can stay focused on the mystery of the gift of life, that's something that enables people of all spiritual traditions to come together and share their wisdoms. So that's the sixth thing we need to do. And the seventh, we need a political and an economic system that supports the other six. At the moment, we've got a political and economic system that is, in fact, destroying the other six. But if we can create that political and economic system that supports the other six, then we make the change. So those are the 7 things we need to do. Now, if we do those 7 things and the problems that I've been talking about don't happen, we still win. It's still a better world. You know, if everything happens and we don't suffer from economic collapse or climate change or peak oil, but we do those 7 things, we still win. It's a win-win strategy. So that's what I'd suggest. If we do those 7 things, build community, live more simply, cultivate creativity, build our skills in non-violence, preserve knowledge and wisdom, cultivate an inclusive spirituality that includes that frog down there as much as me, and we build an economic and political system that supports those 6, we could be living in a different planet in 9 months' time.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Everybody watching, everybody can see, everybody waiting to be free. Time's come, time to get ready, time for love.